Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is March 11, 2022. We want to thank Clinton Ignatoff and his amazing podcast, Concerned Medicine. Thank you, Clinton. And feel free to join in at the end with a question or two. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with Eliza Newland Carney. Where are you calling in from, Eliza?
I'm calling in from beautiful Silver Spring, Maryland. Silver Spring is a close-in suburb to Washington, D.C., so I'm right outside the capital region and inside the Beltway, in fact.
It is such a pleasure and an honor. I've talked to you for years. Let's just dig right into it. What's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being is human connection, and honestly, connection with all living things. We need to connect with not only humans, but with plants and animals, and with the earth and with the universe.
That is beautiful. I love that. Wow. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
I would have to say in total candor, Jerry, that my favorite way to receive information is in a song. When information is embedded in music and in the human voice, it lifts me up and it reaches me in my heart.
That is such a great answer. And in being a journalist and a reporter and doing this your whole career, as well as doing music, I have to tell you, there's an important writer. I don't know her name, but I heard her talk on the radio one day, and she says, my mother lives in a Caribbean island. She never learned to read, but she knows what to do when a tsunami hits because a song told her what to do.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And it really
Like
goes to the value and power of song as an educational tool, which is really at the heart of a lot of my work. So that's very exciting and interesting. Yeah.
It's like we don't even, in Venice, we have these signs, quick, when a tsunami hits, run this way. And it's like, wait, I know which way to run because I've listened to the songs.
I love that.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Wow. I think that we are just wired for it, Jerry. I mean, on the most basic level, if we didn't have information, we wouldn't survive. And your example speaks right to it. If you don't have information, when the tsunami comes, you're going to drown. So, and think of the early ways that people communicated. They would communicate over large distances using drums. And we communicate for the same reasons that animals do. There is food here. There is danger coming. The storm is coming up. Take shelter. And also for ritual, ritual and connection.
You covered the waterfront. Do thoughts create emotions?
Well, to go back to singing, let's say I have a thought and then I sing my thought. There might be a lot of emotion as I sing that thought,
Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate. I think that the connection between thinking and language may be sort of a creative process. Think about how you narrate things to yourself. You know how people, maybe they even talk to themselves a little bit, or they write in their journal, or they tweet and they blog. We're always putting things into words. So that is kind of a creative way that we make sense of our thoughts.
Well, you anticipated a whole slew of questions we're going to get into, but first, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
write it down.
Oh my God. I got it from McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it down. It's beautiful. Can humans think without language?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
You are someone who has certainty in their thinking. I love this. I appreciate it. You really get what I'm after. So Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down?
Wow. In some weird way, I feel as though that is part of the problem that we're having today as a nation and also as a world. language is broken down in the sense that truth has broken down. One of the things that is a foundation of Western civilization is the concept of reason, of a body of knowledge and fact that we can all agree upon. And one of the ways in which we articulate that body of knowledge and fact is through language. So when language becomes weaponized, we lose truth. And we've really started to lose truth. Think of what's happening in Russia today.
Yeah.
If you speak the truth, you can be placed in jail. It's a very scary and dangerous position to be in.
But again, what do you do when language breaks down? You
What
personally.
what do I do when language breaks down? Well, I think in a situation with other humans, if language breaks down, we resort to physical expression. We hug, we touch, perhaps we cry, perhaps we take a walk or take a breath together. We find
Boy,
other ways to express ourselves.
that is beautiful, because a guy said a couple of weeks ago, "What do you do when language breaks down?" He goes, "Group hug."
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Which is pretty weird, because now we think COVID's going away, so we think we can have group hugs now.
Yes, isn't that a lovely thing? And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why the whole pandemic has been so stressful for people, that one of our key nonverbal means of connection has been taken away.
Exactly. Your observations of humans, are humans more are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, I think in our Western society, we're very caught up in our minds. We're very stuck in our heads, almost to an extreme, to the point where we're walking around holding little devices and looking down, instead of looking up at trees and breathing and having experiences of feeling. So we've sort of lost touch with our feeling selves. But that is more of a societal construct than an innate experience of what it means to be human, in my opinion.
Wow, that was good. So these are two questions from Alan Turing in 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Ah, wow. I love the way that you put that. I suppose it depends on what you mean when you say thinking. But I wonder, could we think if we didn't have a soul? I don't know, Jerry, because look at this. There's artificial intelligence. Sometime in the future, they're going to be robots. They're going to be very, very sophisticated forms of AI. Now, are those beings or machines going to think? And what is thought? In other words, they might be able to deduce, they might even be able to create. You actually have artificial intelligence now able to write a journalistic article on a simplistic level, or to help people write fiction. So I don't know if one could say that there is a soul involved in those activities, but you might be able to say that there's some kind of thought going on. There's certainly a deductive process at work.
It's interesting, because that question I just started over the last year, and usually people go, "Is thinking a function of the soul?" They go, "Depends on what you mean by the soul." And you said, "Depends on what you mean by thinking in that regard," with juxtaposing with the function of the soul. So I really appreciate that, because you anticipated Turing's next question. Can machines think?
Well, I think that machines can think in a rudimentary fashion. Machines now compete on chess with humans. Machines play games with humans. As I mentioned, machines help humans create things. I just finished a wonderful book called Clara and the Sun, which is the protagonist is a robot. And I don't want to ruin the story for you, but it is the robot ends up being sort of more humanistic than some of the other characters around her. And there are some central questions in the book, including whether a robot could ever replace a machine. I mean, a human being, and I think the answer, personally, I think the answer in the book is no. Nevertheless, this character seems to have almost human capacities. And I don't think it's out of this world to imagine that that might happen at some point in the really not so distant future, given how
Yeah.
quickly technology is moving forward.
Yes. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think I pursue both, and I think really happiness comes in meaning.
Well, Viktor Frankl says that meaning, in Man's Search for Meaning, he says, meaning lasts, happiness doesn't necessarily last. What do you think of that idea?
I think that it's complicated because, in a sense, happiness is something that we experience in the moment.
Yeah.
And there's a sense in which you can't, it's like that happiness is like a butterfly. The more you pursue it, the more it eludes you.
Yeah.
But if you settle down and think of other things, it'll quietly come and settle on your shoulder. I think the idea is that sometimes it's only in looking back that we realize sometimes how happy we've been. Sometimes we're not even aware that things are happy. And then so there's some turn and things go wrong and you realize, oh my gosh, that was such a happy time, you know?
Beautiful. Eliza, does the brain, the mind, the human, more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I personally think that there's consciousness outside of our brains and our creation of it. This is a very difficult thing to prove one way or the other, but I sometimes think about the Big Bang. And I think about the tiny particles that were created with the Big Bang and how we all perhaps have particles from the Big Bang in us, right? So that we are somehow connected in that cosmic way. This was something Hunter Thompson believed, and I thought it was a great observation. He was the one who said that, not me. Just to
Wow.
give him credit.
We have particles of the Big Bang.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
Big Bang created all this matter, and we are this matter that originated with the Big Bang. And, so let's say you think that there's some kind of consciousness that created the universe. Well, that consciousness is it's not about me and I'm thinking up life and all of that. It's like there is a consciousness outside of me.
I love that. At the end of their lives, Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa were talking, and they saw some documentary on PBS about the Big Bang. And Frank says, "What came before the Big Bang?" And Don said, "The big."
Well, if you want to really get like biblical, first there was the word, and then the word was God, and the word was with God. To go back to the beginning of our conversation about language and words, and the
That
power
is
of a word, right?
First there was the word. What a line. Okay, so what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Well, probably speed of thought, though I couldn't prove it to you.
There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, Eliza, but that one you got right.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it.
Okay, Audre Lorde says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rayner responded and said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I suggest compassion.
Oh my God, you really get my questions. Compassion, what a great word. What new toy do you suggest?
A music box?
Oh, that's a popular tool, a toy and tool in our house. We love a music box. That is beautiful. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I am worried about the very long to-do list that will greet me the following morning.
My formula you may consider. You lose your to-do list, then you got the day off. So you're free to wander. Then the next day you start a new list and it says find old list at the
Funny.
top.
So funny.
So Marshall McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. And when I say artists, I mean filmmakers, literature, songwriting, journalists, all whatever we want to call art in the general term. Artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn how to cope with what we don't like about them. And this was one of the main pursuits of McLuhan. So I ask you the question, Eliza, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, we're just not listening to artists as much as we should. If we were to think back to, say, the ancient Greeks, they really revered their prophets. And in a sense, the prophet was kind of like an artist, someone who lived and worked in another plane and had access to dreams and tapped the power of them. And those people were revered and listened to. And in modern society, someone who acts like a prophet is dismissed as insane. And artists themselves are sort of marginalized often. Think how marginalized artists were during the pandemic. There was all this relief, but some relief went to artists, but a lot of artists really suffered and struggled a huge amount. And it sort of goes to how, we really placed greater value and importance on small business people than on artists, as an example.
Wow. Do artists have moral obligations?
I think so. And I know it sounds a little high and mighty or eat your peas. Certainly my own songwriting is very, it's gotten to be increasingly social. And I try not to make it didactic and hitting people over the head with some kind of big moralistic point. But really, if you don't have something to say, I don't know. I wonder if you can even really call yourself an artist. Maybe you call yourself a craftsman or craftsperson.
Yeah. It's funny because I saw that pillow in some highbrow catalog today, and the woman's holding it, and it says, "If you don't have nothing nice to say, come sit by my side."
That's funny.
And I was raised by parents. My dad says, if you don't have nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all.
Yeah.
And that's sort of ironic because you want to still be a thinking person, but you want to be social and courteous to people.
Yes. Well, I'm all about that. I'm all about civility. But I think the role of the artist is sometimes a little bit different. Think about the fool in a Shakespeare play. The fool is there to tell the truth and to dig at people, but in a package that frees him to be safe from punishment. So that's the beauty of art, the artistic expression, is that there is a certain freedom that goes with that.
Love it. That is great. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Right now, in some ways, I'm more afraid of old ideas because I feel like a lot of old ideas and attitudes are being really destructive. I read a story in the paper today about a principal of a school, no, assistant principal of an elementary school who was fired for reading a book that was deemed inappropriate to a group of second graders. That scares me. And I feel as though that, to me, is an old idea because that's sort of like, we only have appropriate things that adhere to our family values. And if someone doesn't hold that up, they're out of a job. And that, I think, is very dangerous and very scary.
Very dangerous. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yeah. So when I was about 8 years old, no, when I was about 5 years old, rather, my family moved to Guatemala. And as you can imagine, this was a fairly dramatic event in the life of a small child. And some of my earliest memories are about that move to Guatemala. And there are a lot of dimensions to them, but one of them includes being in the car. We drove from Maine to Panama in a VW bus. And I spent a lot of time in the back of that bus kind of looking at the moon. And I was really fascinated how the moon followed us wherever we went. This is one of my earliest memories.
That is beautiful. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, I recently read an article about memory that really interested me because as we are of a certain age, we don't remember certain things. And sometimes we turn to our partner and we say, well, what was the name of that restaurant? Or did we go to this place or that place? What happened? We can't remember it. And we get so upset that we don't remember it. But this article was about how actually losing memories, not remembering things is quite important. You have to be able to lose memories because there's a sense in which there's only so much room, I suppose, in your functioning psyche to absorb everything and anything around you. And that processing is sort of necessary. And it makes sense, I think. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it was sort of freeing to me to think that it shouldn't be upsetting that I can't remember every single thing perfectly. If I were able to do that, I wouldn't be a healthy human being.
Well, it's beautiful. It's really, the questions are just jumping off points, and you definitely spoke very articulately. I appreciate it. And you really get my questions, Eliza. And it evoked two things James Joyce said: remember to forget.
Well, there you go. That's exactly along those lines.
And it is a discerning thing, like, what are we going to remember and what are we going to forget? And when I say, you know, is memory more a curse or more a blessing? I mean, 80% of people go, well, it's a blessing. And then they'll go, well, it can be a curse. And then they'll go, some people will go, well, yeah, I see what you mean. It can be a curse. And, it's not like I'm trying to encourage them to think that the two choices I give them. But the line about the restaurant really evoked one of my favorite jokes. And the elderly couple moves to Florida, and they're digging and living with their new neighbors. And the neighbors say, well, how do you like your new digs? And they go, great. We went to a restaurant last night. And the guy goes, how was it? And the guy goes, well, I'm having a little trouble with my memory. What's the name of that flower that smells good, comes in different colors, and has a thorn? Guy goes, rose. So he turns to his wife and he goes, Rose, what was the name of the restaurant we ate at last night?
That's pretty funny.
Tell me someone, please, who was a role model for you or made an impact on you. And it's two-part: within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family. Just briefly. And what was that impact specifically?
So when I was growing up, we had a pretty close family, and both my parents were important role models to me. But as a daughter with a mother, I'd have to say that special mother-daughter bond is a unique one, and that I felt a really special understanding with my mother and still do. And there are just so many innumerable ways she influenced me, including sharing books with me that she was reading and that I would then read and that we would talk about together. And her love of literature is something we share in a deep way and still share. And that's an important influence in my life. And
Well,
conversely,
say
go ahead.
one thing you got from your dad too.
Yeah, so my dad loves to laugh and has a great sense of humor and is very philosophical in the way that he lives his life. And he and I do a lot of laughing together, and I derive a lot of strength from his ability to take things in stride and be kind and be philosophical about the vicissitudes of life.
Wow, that was beautiful. So outside your immediate family.
So if I were to think back, and this is an unusual one, but it was a woman who came into our lives during a period when I was, I guess, in upper elementary school, maybe lower middle school. And my mother was getting a graduate degree. She was extremely busy, and she wasn't always able to collect me from school or help me after school. And she brought in a helper, kind of like a college student. And this woman was studying voice. And she made such a huge impression upon me. And I went and saw her sing in her vocal recitals, and we talked about music, and she would sing songs to me, and we sang songs together. And looking back, I think that was actually quite important because I went on to be very much involved in songs, writing songs, being in choral groups, singing. It's not my profession, but it's very important to me. And I sometimes have wondered whether that was one of the reasons why that became so important to me.
Beautiful. What was her name?
Carol.
What an amazing, that's beautiful. Were you raised a particular religion?
Technically, yes, we were Episcopalians, but I would have to say in candor that we did not always worship in that fashion. We lived in Brussels during my teenage years, and we did not connect with the Church of England, which is the umbrella for the Episcopal Church in Brussels. The English language church in Brussels was Church of England. And therefore, we attended Quaker meeting for 2 years. And I also went to a Quaker high school and a Quaker college. And I also had an aunt who was a Zen Buddhist, and I did a little Zen practice with her as a teenager too, which made a big impression upon me. And there was a time when she and her husband, my uncle, and their family were living in Japan, and we visited them in Japan and visited a Zen monastery. And all of these experiences made a huge impression on me. And I did not feel with my parents that there was a particular religion being laid out as the one and only. I felt there was an openness to different ways of worshiping and an openness to exploring different paths. And today I do not practice as an Episcopalian. I attend a Unitarian church, and I consider myself a Unitarian, which is a great place to end up if you like exploring different religious faiths side by side.
It's very nice. We've attended with Dylan Buston, a mutual friend, and Martha to their Unitarian services, and it's been always inspiring. Do you pray?
You know, the prayer that I do, Jerry, is in the form of my singing.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a song called Give Thanks, which is a gratitude song. And it's sort of starts as being giving thanks for a lot of little daily things, but then it kind of gets bigger. And it's like, I give thanks for all these big things. So thanks for the songs and the gifts of life and the grace around me. I sing that song every day. Every single day I sing that song. And while I'm singing it, I feel gratitude.
Oh, God, that is touching. Beautiful. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well done, good and faithful servant.
That is good. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I'm sorry to say that I think evil people exist.
Wow. This question sort of comes out of that is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'm going to set it up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. And in fact, the first one is Zen teacher Alan Watts. If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So the basic question, Eliza, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I think there's some truth to that. And I think that it goes to the idea of turning the other cheek. But my main message here is forgiveness, you know, and it has to do with part with anger. I think people sometimes become so angry. The term enemy is an ambiguous one, and we might want to spend some time talking about what is meant by that. But anyone who makes you angry has power over you as long as that anger is sort of raging through you. But the minute you forgive someone, you're released because you no longer are imprisoned by your anger.
Oh, it's beautiful. Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the smell the flower releases when the foot steps on it.
Wow.
And I love that because I think forgiveness is the key, but it's like it even goes to Ram Dass, you know, be here now. You were talking about being present. He said back a few years ago, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. It's like fill in the blank. You know, I'm having a real hard time loving, you know, you can anybody you want nowadays. There's many we could say.
Yeah.
But let's go into the anger thing for a second and suss that out, because this is a question that Susie's dad helped me on, and you probably met him. He's a great social worker and political activist. But I'm going to ask you it this way first. Anger can be a productive emotion when, fill in the blank.
When you need to stick up for yourself or someone else.
Yeah.
If it's a question of fairness and unfairness to another person, I think some kind of anger might be justified. Sometimes anger is a tool for justice.
Well put. So I used to ask it for like 25 years, can anger be a productive emotion? And David said, no, switch it, because they would go yes or no. And then eventually someone said, I say, anger can be a productive emotion when, fill in the blank, and they go, anger can't be a productive emotion. So I mean, George Clinton said it well too. He says all emotions can be productive and not productive.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
But I think as a woman, I'll say, especially Jerry, because women are really socialized not to feel and express anger.
Yeah.
It's actually been important for me as I have grown older and time has gone on to allow anger into my repertoire of emotions. If you're
Yeah.
not allowing yourself to feel anger and even express it in an appropriate way when it's justified, it can turn in and you can turn it against yourself, and you can punish yourself or be angry at yourself or disempower yourself or become depressed or whatever. So I think it's especially important for women to realize being angry doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't make you a witch, you know?
Exactly. That is so well put. And here's a question I've dropped for years, but it's so appropriate here. Lewis Hines published photographs of child labor in newspaper. That's printed matter. Upton Sinclair wrote a book, The Jungle. They both could be detailed as the tipping point to change a law. So it's a little specific of a question. Can you tell me any music, theater, or art or film that actually was the tipping point to change a law? I know a song like We Shall Overcome, big impact, but we don't necessarily say it was the tipping point like Lewis Hines' photographs, child labor, or Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, and meat packaging laws. So I'm talking, and it's so that's why I sort of dropped the question. But I'm curious, you're so involved in printed matter and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
history of printed matter.
yeah.
And you could give other examples. We know that printed matter is it just more powerful because it's been around longer, but photographs have been around pretty long. Theater's been around as long as printed matter, we would say. So any other of these forms?
Well, I can think of a couple of examples. First of all, Charles Dickens was hugely influential in changing child labor laws in England by virtue of his fiction writing.
Yeah.
So that's one that I often think about, and I really admire him for what he was able to do there. And
But
I
again,
think
that's
when,
printed matter.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
When we talk about tipping points,
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard, I believe, to come down to one single thing.
Yeah.
There's so many drops of water going into the cup, and then the cup fills over. Which was the drop that caused the cup to spill over? But to think of a non-printed matter example, I'm thinking about the Vietnam War. And I'm thinking about how the photographs, in particular, of the effect of napalm on villages,
Yeah.
and a small child running down the street having been struck with napalm.
Yeah.
That's the kind of iconic photo that I think does make a lasting and valuable, important change. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would agree. I'd also seen the Vietnam War bleed out of our TV sets. It
Yes.
has come up, and I have gotten specifics, but it was fun for you to teach me that Dickens thing. That was very important. And so Eliza, just walk us through sort of briefly how, I mean, you're many things, but I mean, would you say, if I met you at a party, I say, what do you do? Do you say journalist, reporter, vet, political scribe, writer, editor? I mean, what do you say in a few words, your main?
So my main thing now, Jerry, is that I run a nonprofit called the Civic Circle, which uses music and the arts to empower young students to understand and participate in democracy. Now, in
Right,
addition, I do write a regular column for the Fulcrum, which is a democracy advocacy website.
right,
I've sort of reinvented myself from being an accountability journalist to being more of a solutions journalist. And I try to lift up civic solutions and success stories through my newsletter and my column. Um, but I'm also writing songs. I'm writing kids
right,
songs that try to inspire kids to engage in democracy. I'm writing curriculum to engage young students in what we call the 7 steps to democracy, which are listen, learn, choose, join, speak, act, and lead. So listen is civility and peaceful conflict resolution. Learn is news literacy. Choose is voting. Join is service learning. Speak is advocacy. Act is organizing. And lead is running for office. So that's really my main passion and activity right now. And if you wanted to boil it down to just a couple of things, I'd say, I'm a democracy writer and civic learning
yeah.
advocate. Or if you
Oh,
wanted to boil it down to one word, I'd be like, I'm a creative. But
that is really good. But I want to stay on, if we could, just to learn your background roots.
yes.
Is you pursued journalism and then you pursued songwriting. Let's say those two. The tipping point, and again, that's great that you helped me psychoanalyze the word tipping point, but just sort of where did you kick over? You're studying, you're going to college, you're growing up with people who are aware of, reading newspapers and current events, your parents. Where did you go? Oh, I want to do that. I want to go study journalism. What kicked you over to say, that's what I want to pursue as my career? And then you're a creative. So in song, what kicked you over into saying, I want to, you talked about the woman teaching you
yeah.
vocal, but where did you go? I want to be a songwriter, not just sing. I want to actually be a lyricist. So those two sort of tipping points,
Yeah.
over your pursuits in your education and
Well,
whatever.
it's really funny, Jerry, because I really spent my whole life kind of living 2 lives. I was this journalist and writing about political money and being a Beltway journalist and having a good time with that, but I was also writing songs. And I was, doing actually even education with youth around songs at my place of worship and did a children's CD. So I was kind of living these 2 lives. And my whole life, in some way, I think I have frankly struggled because I was drawn to both. I wanted to do both. I wanted to do music and I wanted to do writing. And I did very deliberately at one point choose writing. And I devoted myself to writing for, really 30 years. And I loved it. And I got a lot out of it. But I think professionally, you reach a certain point in your life and in your career where you want to change the pace and give back and give room for the other aspects of your personality that maybe haven't been explored and developed fully. So for me to start this nonprofit draws on all these different passions and brings them all together. My passion for democracy, my passion for songwriting. I've served on all these nonprofit boards. So the whole nonprofit management piece and the creativity of creating an organization. So all of those things come together in the work that I'm currently doing. And it's frankly kind of a relief in some ways to no longer have these two things segregated into 2 different pieces of my life. They now seem to come together, the writing and the songwriting and the nonprofit management work. But also to go back to your earlier question about when and how, well, when I was younger, both of my older brothers at various points had newspaper jobs. My oldest brother, Bill, had worked for a stringer for the Washington Star, the Evening Star of Washington, a newspaper that no longer exists. He did this after he left high school and before he started college, and also sort of during his college years in part. And my brother Nick had gotten, I believe, a summer internship at the Boston Globe. And I think looking at my two older brothers doing these jobs honestly kind of electrified me. I was like, I want to do that. Boy, that sounds great, especially Nick's Boston Globe job. I was like, that sounds amazing. I'd never even thought of that. I was like, I would love to do that. And so that, I think, sort of helped plant the seed. And my mother, to go back to my mother, had a dear friend named Jane O'Reilly, a journalist and writer, who also was close enough with our family that at one point she even sort of semi-supervised me over the summer at one point, again, when my mother was unavailable and I was up in Maine. And Jane O'Reilly was kind of living in the house with myself and my brother to make sure that everything stayed on track. And she was tremendously influential on me. You know, knowing this older woman journalist really excited me and I think influenced me quite a bit. And I'd say it was probably junior year in high school. I'm sorry, junior year in college, not till junior year in college, when I really was having to start to think about what am I going to do after I graduate? I hadn't really figured it out. Up until that point, actually, I had been telling everyone I wanted to be a singer. And then junior year in college, it kind of put all the pieces together for me. I love being busy. I'm really curious and always reading. I love to write. It all just seemed to fit. And, you know, I'd have to say that the kind of beltway journalism aspect of it was somewhat a product of just moving back to Washington. I had been a local journalist in Pennsylvania, and I had enjoyed that very much. But in 1989, I moved back to Washington, having gotten a graduate degree at Columbia University. And most of the jobs in DC, a lot of them are focused on Congress and on government. And it was really at that point that I started to get excited about politics and Congress and government as an institution and political money, all these things I hadn't really been that steeped in previously, but which I really liked writing about. So that was how that came about.
That was really real well done. And let's go back to Carol, to, you know, inspiring you to sing. Who were the lyricists or songwriters that, you know, just name 2 or 3 of them that
Yeah,
were
yeah,
tipping points to kick you over,
yeah,
like, that's what I wanna do.
yeah. So I remember reading once, Jerry, that Joni Mitchell was the person who was single-handedly responsible for the most women ever picking up a guitar and playing a song. And I thought, boy, that resonates. I picked up a guitar and started playing every single Joni Mitchell song. And I really loved Carla Bonoff. I really loved Carole King. I loved James Taylor. I loved John Prine. You know, these are all songs that were very easy to sing, fun to sing. Went to college, everybody was singing and playing in the dorm. I had a dorm mate who played the guitar, and she taught me. I'd never learned guitar from a teacher.
Yeah,
I learned from my college roommate, you
yeah.
know, and she taught me all these John Prine songs, and I still like singing John Prine.
John Prine is amazing. Yeah, you really got a great, list there. But a couple of the writers that you might not have met early in your political journalist were there any writers that you were reading? I mean, you mentioned Hunter Thompson earlier, and I like that. But I mean, I'm just saying any other early writers that you read that
Yeah.
were sort of like that's I want to aspire to that kind of writing.
Yeah, well, one of my big writers I've always looked up to is David Remnick at the New
Uh-huh.
Yorker.
Yeah.
And as far as newspaper writers go, there's a guy I still read religiously. His name is Dana Milbank. I don't know if you ever read him. He's an op-ed commentator, and he writes these pieces that are so biting and so funny and so ruthless. And I pick up Dana Milbank every day, and I'm just go, Dana Milbank strikes again. He's just incredible. He just knocks it out of the park virtually every day, which is hard to do. It's amazing.
That
It's
is
amazing.
good. Thank you for knowing the answers to all these questions. You really are articulate. So James Joyce, oh no. Oh yeah, we missed that. Let's see. We're going to James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, they say that truth is stranger than fiction, and it's really true. And I think that in some weird way, that one reason we need to fictionalize things is this so they can be believable.
Yeah.
Sometimes you read a newspaper article and it's just so over the top. You're like, I just don't even believe that. That's crazy. It's not even believable. But maybe if you go to a play and you suspend disbelief and you don't even expect to believe it, some truth can get through to you without too much interference from your sense of screening out what may not be believable or not.
And it's funny because the word believe has the word lie in the middle of it. So a screenwriting teacher told me great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art or great film, great music is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process? And you can put in both as a journalist, as a songwriter, and as a cultural leader that
Yeah.
you're doing now.
Yeah. So in some ways, Jerry, I'd have to say that intention is often on the back burner. When I write songs, they just kind of pop out, which is a
Yeah.
strange thing to say, but usually it starts with just one phrase or one line. And that is often maybe the hook or the basis for a refrain, and you build everything around that. And where that pops out from is not a place of intention. I'm sure you're familiar with the creativity that exists between the time of sleeping and waking. It's not unusual to be between waking and sleeping and waking and to have things pop into your mind that are ones you want to hold on to. Maybe there's a solution to a problem you've been working on, but often songs, that's a place where songs can kind of pop out and start to pop out. And the other thing that's so interesting to me is that I will often write a song. Let's say I write a song about friendship. I wrote a song about friendship years and years and years ago. It's called Sweet Lady Friend. And I wrote it about really a specific person who sadly has now passed away. But that song has come back to me at different points in my life with different resonances, like, oh my, this song is really coming into its own now. It's like the song anticipated what was going to happen in my life. Well, not really, but songs resonate in new and different ways over the decades. And that isn't about intention. That's just about, what happens when you interpret it. That's an important piece, I think, of the creative process is the reader, the listener, the audience member.
Yeah.
Each one is going to interpret the piece in a new way. And the piece doesn't really have meaning until it's been experienced by someone else.
Perfect anticipation. Next question. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your listener, your audience, when you're creating? And in both aspects,
Yeah.
as a journalist and
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you that as a journalist, my reader is fairly high in my mind. And that speaks in part to who I'm writing for. If I'm writing a piece for National Journal, I know a certain audience is going to read that piece and I tailor it to that audience. If I'm writing a piece for the Fulcrum, I know that audience and I'm going to make sure that the piece is tailored to that audience. And it honestly can be a little problematic. You can self-censor a little bit. You work with certain editors, certain editors are looking for a certain type of thing. They've trained you to deliver a certain type of thing. And so you're really thinking a lot about the reader. And principally, you might be thinking about your very first reader, who's your editor. So that's journalistic writing. The writing that I do as a songwriter, I cannot say I think much about the audience for most of the songs I write, which are just songs I write because I feel like it. But the songs I write for my program, for the Civic Circle, I definitely am thinking about that audience. Let's say I'm writing a song about news literacy. I have certain specific things that I want to convey. I want the song to be fun to listen to and simple and easy and something can be sung along with, but I also want a little rigor there. I want to be able to say, okay, let's look at this song. What are the lessons in this song? What did we take away from this song? This song is a teaching tool. So I think about the audience a lot more with the songwriting I do for an educational purpose.
I love that word rigor. And this obit appeared in the New York Times in the last couple of days. Walter Means, writer immortalized as reporter. And I love this little part. I says, well, this is good to bring up. He said he was archetypical, just the facts, ma'am, reporter. And in his memoir, he formulated the description of his job, quote, to get past the managers and spinners to assess the strengths the candidates claim, as well as the failures and flaws that they try to conceal.
That's great. That's really great.
How much is that doable? And in you're saying that's great. That's a high aspiration.
Yeah.
Is it doable?
Well, when you're a Beltway journalist, that really speaks to what you're up against. Because let's say you go interview the Speaker of the House. That individual is going to give you their spin. They're going to give you, what their take on things is and what they think is happening. And often, inside the Beltway, you'll be interviewing people who they have vested interests, lobbyists, they want to get a particular message across. The PR people, they want to get a particular message across. So sort of getting something that is really authentic can be difficult. And oftentimes to do that, you have to go beyond people. You have to go to documents. I spent a lot of time with documents. I spent a lot of time looking at campaign finance records. The numbers told the story, not the spinners, not the handlers,
Wow. There's a great film I showed many years ago, but it was revealing when spinner, what did they call spinners then? The guys who told the
Flack, PR person.
Yeah, but they're basically the PR person. And the guy's being interviewed on Larry King. I think it's Al Gore. And he says, blah, 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 the question. And he goes, we'll cut to break and you'll answer that when you get back. And because the film was about how you could see the satellite feed of them in the studio and not watch the commercial. And the spinner basically said, Al, cover your mic. And I'm going to tell you, don't answer that question. Stick to your agenda. But it leaked through. The spinner's voice leaked through, and you heard him saying that to Al. So it was very revealing of something that people don't get, And I appreciate you saying that. But back to in more of a, because you do this full range, you're like a comprehensivist besides a creative. You're full range. This is Ruth Draper, and I'm curious what you think of her statement, and maybe more in the musical world. The key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. That sounds like a high aspiration. I mean, we experienced this at the music festival we've attended for so many years, Sweet Chariot on Swan's Island. How does one accomplish that?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting thing that you raise because we have been through a prolonged period of experiencing concerts and musical experiences virtually. And the Civic Circle, some of our programming has been such that we're live streaming and we're pretending that we're interacting with an audience.
Yeah.
But we can't see them and we can't hear them and we can't have their questions submitted to us or we can't see them clapping, it's sort of like Bill Burnett the other day did his birthday concert, our mutual friend. And, I don't believe he could see any of us. And we should talk to him about, well, what was that experience like? And I think I noted him at one point, sort of like, well, I can't see you, but, I'm going to pretend that I'm interacting with you kind of thing. And I think it really speaks to how stale it can feel when you're not interacting with people. I had a lovely experience the other night. It was such a symbol of the pandemic ending. Dan and I went to a party We went to a party at someone's house, and there was a buffet where we all shared food, and people were singing in the living room, and I got up and I sang a song. And as I sang the song, I made eye contact with virtually every person in the room, because that's when you're a performer, that's what you do. You kind of instinctually make that connection and you feed off them, and you're like, oh, that person's smiling, and how great, I'm going to smile now too. And when you don't have that, it's so static.
Yeah.
It's not like we can't have concerts that way, but it just doesn't capture the magic of what you're talking about, which is that interaction of the audience practically coming on stage with you. And I think you and I talked about this during the salon you did a while back. I said at the festival, we literally bring the audience on stage. They walk up there with us.
That is amazing. Like we've done Ruth Draper for years, but it is funny. I have to interject. I've done my events for 40 years with people in a room talking. And for 2 years, I've done them on Zoom, and they're better than the 38 years I did it in live. And people go, I don't want to hear that. Now,
Yeah.
I still live a life where I can ride my bike to the beach and interact with live people all through COVID. But my events were people are more attentive. We can all see eye contact, and they didn't have to drive and park and go through. It's so much easier. And the sense of being together, even though it is virtual, and you use the word pretending, has been amazing for me. And I'm less hesitant, especially with my reading clubs, to ever switch them back to live at a library because of various things like parking, and people are getting older, and we got so many people from other cities and other countries involved now. So anyways, it is a phenomenon that we're adjusting to.
Yeah, I think when you do your events, one thing that is valuable is that it can really be to the point. And in part, I think it goes to the interruption factor and the attentiveness factor. If you have a group of 6 people, they're always going to break into little mini conversations.
Yeah.
In person. Whereas if you have 6 people on Zoom, actually, they might be willing to sit there and simply observe one another one at a time. So it can be more to the point. I think the thing that's really static and difficult is just the live stream that has no interaction. Let's say hypothetically you were just standing up and giving a speech on Facebook Live, and you didn't see anyone. You would find that limiting, I think.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Those were both really good points, because I'm able to go around the room easier in Zoom because people aren't staring off in a room. They're staring off into other things, but everybody's looking. And it is more to the point. It's just a fun, like, little phenomenon that I'm still continuing to deal with, like the services and disservices. So, Eliza, this is so fun. And the next question is something McLuhan said about everything humans invent, whether it's tangible or not, extends some humanness. So clothing extends our skin, knife and fork extends our teeth, shutter in a camera or projector is an extension of our eyelid. Maybe philosophy or religion's extension of consciousness or whatever. What does the two tools you've used, the writing utensil, whether it's a pen or a keyboard, and the guitar, what humanness does the writing utensil extend?
I would say language. It's sort of obvious, but you've talked about how language is bound up with our humanity and communication and connection. To go back to the very beginning of our conversation, what brings meaning to life? Connection. And so both of those furnish a means of connecting with others. And through it, think about the word voice. You can have a voice as a writer, you can have a voice as a singer, your guitar can have a voice, but you're giving voice. And so I think, in a sense, they're an expression of identity.
Ooh.
Who am I? And what do I have to say to you?
Oh my God, you really brought up a great word, because both Krishnamurti and McLuhan say violence is a human search for identity. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I put things, I think, often in the context of democracy and the civic learning that I'm bound up with. And one thing I have said to students recently in the context of Russia's attack on Ukraine is that war is the ultimate civic failure. And I think that identity historically has been very tied up in land. Who am I as a citizen of a country or of a particular geographic region? And so violence, I think, is a territorial, it's an expression of territorial, aggression.
It's territorial. That is amazing. So beautiful. Utah Phillips said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, anarchy is a state of nature without any rules, in my opinion, frankly. And I think that we as a group should be making rules. I think that's what happened with the US Constitution. People got in a room and for a long time they hashed it out and they were like, what should our rules be? And even after that, they weren't done. The states were like, no, we don't like these rules. And so they wrote a Bill of Rights. They were like, okay, we'll spill out even further. Here's what the rules really are. And frankly, we're still making the rules. You know, that in our society, the courts are still figuring it out. We're constantly having rulings and the rules change and then they change again. So, we have placed rulemaking power in the hands of various entities, the courts, the Congress, the executive branch, and to some degree the people, because we do have the power to vote on who is making the rules. But we're not done making rules, and it's a constantly evolving process.
Wow. So John Basil Barnhill said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. In the 2005 film V for Vendetta, that quote was paraphrased. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs or the war on poverty or the war on terrorism? In fact, the war on drugs, some government guy goes, you can't have a war on drugs because drugs can't fight and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So you know what I'm saying about these false fears.
Yeah.
How do you personally handle false fears?
Well, for me, it's about storytelling. And I think storytelling is a powerful agent for change. And it can happen through someone writing an article, but it could also just happen from someone, standing up and testifying, giving a testimonial in any context. This is who I am, and this is what happened as I saw it. And maybe the story is about someone in your family or a friend of yours, but it's those stories that we tell that cause people to think and act in a different way.
Wow. What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Well, they go together, Jerry, don't they? And what we tell our 3rd to 5th graders is, I have a right to swing my arms, but you have a right not to be struck by my swinging arms.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is really well done, man. I want to take all your classes. What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
I would say rebellion off the cuff seems to be an individual act, and revolution is a collective act.
Yeah. Let's go back to music for a second. My friend says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. So technique is like hand. You can learn how to play the guitar, like your roommate taught you how to play that chord. Theory is head. You can learn this is a C chord, or this is how this musical piece is played out. Or in the words of the great Bob Lucas, this song is in the G of key. But the 3rd T, taste, Dave Liebman from the Miles Davis saxophone says that his heart is taste. How does one acquire taste in music?
I think that listening to music is a way to develop that. You know, I'm tempted to say, I'm not sure you can acquire it. Are you born with it? It's really more than just one thing. And I'd have to say it's probably a lifelong process, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does one become empathic? How does one develop the ability to tap into one's emotions and express those emotions? It's sort of a lifelong journey, isn't it? We're all still learning and trying to do that effectively. And we often get we have emotional traffic jams. We can't access it for whatever reason.
Well, I like your word journey there too, because it's really important because, most people go, well, you listen or you're submerged in it. But it again is like, why did you gravitate more towards Joni Mitchell when there was I love to bring up Maria Callas, who I didn't grow up listening to, but I saw that doc on her recently. And I've used this quote for years just because it illustrates. She said, in order to be a performer, you have to have half your brain in control and half of it out of control.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
And so that's sort of like this growth thing you implied by hey, we're still learning. I'm not done. But how to become empathic is an amazing question to probe. You brought up the word journey. Why do we, if the cliche, or which turned into an archetype, is the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to name a destination or seek a destination if the journey is more important?
It's such a good question. And I've been thinking about this recently from the point of view of my organization, because there's a lot of emphasis in the world of nonprofit management on strategic planning. You need to have a 3-year or 5-year strategic plan. You have to have your goals and they need to be laid out and you're kind of marching in unison towards your goals. But the flip side of that is that sometimes an organization grows in an organic fashion. So
Yeah.
we're going to try this little thing. And then we say, oh my gosh, the people in this community really need this. And well, just to give an example, so there's this group, Small Things Matter, that was started by actually literally a middle school student who was doing crafting projects with little kids in classrooms. She got older and older. She got to be high school. Pandemic hit. People in our community were hungry. They didn't have food. And a lot of what she does now is no longer crafting. She's delivering food to people. She's got all these food cabinets and pantries set up for people. And that wasn't because she had a strategic plan. She responded to a need in the moment. So I think there's value to both. I will say from a creative point of view, and this is interesting, I read this great statement once by a writer about writing, and it was something to the effect that don't write because you think you're going to be famous or because you're going to sell 1 million books or because you think you're going to get rich. Write because you love to write.
Yeah.
And I loved that because I think it sort of places the emphasis at where it needs to be. And I also think that success is born of love. If you love what you're doing and you have joy in what you're doing, you're going to be more successful. And from an organizational point of view, our group, the Civic Circle, would be more successful if people are motivated by enthusiasm and delight and joy than by some stress point about whether we have reached certain milestone at a certain time or not, if you see what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. That's really, everything you're saying is touching me and it's helping me. So what's more fundamental, language or music?
Oh, you know what? I want to say, I think I've heard you ask this question before. I would say maybe music is more fundamental for the following reason. And you asked, can you think without speaking? And I thought of an answer to that too, which is that a baby thinks without speaking. So obviously you can think without speaking. And just to go back to a baby makes a musical sound with his or her voice. They babble, 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 and they sing little nonsense songs. And so that would argue to me that music is more fundamental than language.
It's more fundamental. So McLuhan has an interesting thing in this regard. McLuhan says that song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
I don't know. I think that it's more than that, Jerry. I don't think it's just language difference. I think it
Yeah.
is cultural difference. Like, this would be an interesting one to speak about with Annegret Bear, the drummer, who
Yeah.
you and I both know from the Sweet Chariot Music Festival. She's been to various places in Africa, I believe, to do and study her drumming. And my impression is that a lot of that drumming, which of course is its own form of music, is tied up with different rituals, with different cultural purposes. It's not because of language that they have what they have. It's because of other things, like we needed to do a dance to celebrate a marriage, or we needed to have a rhythm that explained that war was coming, or I'm making those things up. Those are hypothetical, but you see the point.
No, I see the point. It's good. And so another thing Marshall talked about was it's misleading to suppose there's any difference between education and entertainment. So you've you've been in both for so many ways in so many years. It says it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. And this is like maybe just discuss that difference between education and entertainment, because you talked about, I can actually explain to children some concepts that are be considered educational, but it's entertaining. So I'm more wondering your thoughts on whatever pleases teaches more effectively. There's so many words there we could psychoanalyze, but just your overall view.
Yeah. Well, I want to share a word with you that I didn't learn until I started this group, but it's a real word that people use, which is edutainment.
Oh yeah.
People, but I definitely agree that that which pleases teaches more effectively. And I often go back to the example of the alphabet song. How do children learn the alphabet? They learn the alphabet by singing a song. Would we have as many children learning the alphabet as quickly as they do if we didn't have that little song? Probably not, So yeah, I'm a huge believer in the power of song as a teaching tool. The other thing I want to talk about is modes of change. And the goal that I have in terms of advancing civic learning is the mode of change that is not, I do it to you, I do something to you without you. It's not, I do something to you with you. It's you bring about change yourself. In other words, change is done by you for you. I don't know if I've explained that clearly.
No,
But
that's
so that's one reason why we don't just go in there and sing songs to kids and have them learn our songs and teach them what the lesson in the song is. And we have other elements too with the speaking engagements. The young, older civic actors come in and talk about their civic work. But we bring in teaching artists to get the students to write their own songs, poems, and stories. And that is the piece that I think makes it memorable and gives them ownership of it. I mean, first of all, they might remember something that they learned in a song that we wrote better than they would learn if they were trying to memorize for a test, but they're really going to remember the song they wrote.
Yeah. No, it's really good. I worked with this editor and I says, okay, he showed me and I goes, I'd never do that my way, but let's keep it because I wanted him to be a contributor to the project. And
Yes,
it's like, yeah,
it's ownership.
yeah, I like that. For you, by you. What do you think the motive of the cave artist was? And let's include the cave dancers, which we don't know much about, the cave musicians. What was their basic motive? What's your guess?
I think it's the same motives that we have today with our art pieces, to tell a story.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't actually visited those caves and I'd love to. That would be a great thing to do. I've seen images. I think I'm correct that you will probably find images that depict someone's hunting down of a big animal. First, I
Yeah.
saw the animal, then I ran after the animal, Then I threw my spear at the animal. Then I dragged the animal home. Then I ate the animal. I think you're going to see there's a story there.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I don't think there's a one size fits all on that one. I don't think you can accomplish much unless you're able to deploy both.
Beautiful. You've accomplished a lot, Eliza. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest
Oh
step?
man. Yeah. Um, I would put a fourth ingredient in there, hard work.
Yeah.
And my father has always said to me, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing what you just said, because that is when we start discussing luck on those three choices, I always bring that up. It's Gary Player. I learned that quote from the more you practice, the luckier you
Yeah,
get. But it's
yeah.
funny you added a fourth, because Mike Wilson added a fourth once too. He says, I'm not going to settle for yours. I think another one is necessity.
I think necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. Certainly.
Is perception reality?
In some sense, it has to be, because what else have we got, right? I don't know if you've seen some of the articles that have come out in the last year about, is our entire universe the creation of someone else's artificial world, or
Yeah.
are we, is this a dream?
Yeah.
Shakespeare explored that one too. And in a sense, maybe it doesn't really matter, because I'm having the same experience, whether I'm someone else's dream or whether this is a real thing that I'm living.
It's amazing. I love Lily Tomlin said, reality's just a collective hunch. So a couple of my film icons say, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this just comes through me. So I know it's both and it depends, but just your thoughts. Is art making, music making, journalism more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology or culture is dominant?
Well, I do perceive myself more as a vehicle. If I'm writing an article, there's sometimes this feeling that the article's already written and I just need to kind of get out of the way and let it be there on the page. And it's a little bit the same way with songs. Like when you finally have that aha moment, you're like, oh my God, I wrote this song. That was what it was meant to be. That's what it was trying to say. This is where it is. I've now figured it out. Like you're pulling it behind, the curtain and you see it. So yeah, I'm not sure. It is true that people make inventions at the same time in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, so you'd have to say in that sense that a lot of creation is an expression of the coming together of different forces at a particular moment and time. And I think our experiences are very universal. As I said, the cave people had an experience perhaps not so different from ours. We're all about human relationships, telling stories, and often they're the same stories over and over again. I fell in love.
Yeah.
Someone died and I was sad.
I'm so much fishing for answers when I do these. Like 4 times a week, I ask all these same questions, and there's so many answers that I want to hear. But I love to hear, other answers. But all the answers you give me are the ones I like to hear.
Oh, good.
I got to tell you that. I mean, it's true. And then, well, in the last one, you really evoked we say we're artists are the atomic dogs. We're in the Wizard of Us. We're just pulling the curtain back and say, here, you decide. So T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
English.
What form? What form is your inner consciousness in?
So, Jerry, I do a fair amount of journal writing. I try to write my journal pretty much every single day.
Wow.
And it is not unusual for me when I wake up or if I'm walking around for words to be popping into my head that are making sense of my experiences in life. And then I'm like, go sit down with my journal and I write them all down, you
Yeah.
know? So I don't know if that answers the question,
No,
but
that answers the question, definitely. But I flubbed. One more question about the vehicle I forgot to ask is, can art making, music making be egoless?
oh, I definitely think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you'd have to say probably the greatest artists are the ones who are not driven by ego.
But see, again, this is amazing. You're like the ideal person I've ever interviewed, because 80%, 80 to 90% of people go, can art making be egoless? And they go, no, there's always ego involved. And one person came along and said, great art is egoless. And it was like, I loved hearing that, because I don't gauge my sensibility in doing this on what the 80 or 90% is saying. But it is interesting how so many of the questions are answered a certain way. So it's almost like I'm dying to hear people say the opposite. Like the woman I interviewed the other day says, what form is your inner dialogue in? And she started talking in Swedish, and I thought she was making up a language like it was Esperanto, because she's a comedian too. And I finally says, well, what language? Was that Esperanto or was that gibberish? She goes, no, it's Swedish. I goes, okay, well, the real question is, what form is your inner consciousness in? And she goes, I don't know, Jello. but one of my favorite answers ever was, what language is your inner dialogue in? And this woman goes, I wish I knew. Which I love that answer, because it's like, people go, my mother complaining, or, TV commercials or
Oh,
whatever.
wow. Wow. That's so interesting.
So Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Mm, I would say that I love the quote from, I think it's Hamlet, you know, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are written of in your philosophy. And I don't know if that really is close enough or if it even really expresses what I'm trying to say, but I definitely feel that in general, there are these sort of great, great mysteries of life that are
Yeah.
beyond our understanding. And, that I derive, frankly, faith and inspiration from that.
Yes.
Okay, here's a good example. So I've been reading a lot about trees, and I don't know how much you've been reading lately, but there's been a lot. There was a very interesting German writer who published a book in German a few years back called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it was translated to English a couple years ago. And I gave that book to my dad. First of all, I thought he would love that. And also I bought it for myself and read it. And there was a fiction book called The Overstory, which you might have also heard about, which incorporates into the narrative a lot of the same scientific findings, which have to do with the ways in which trees communicate, which are super sophisticated. And the way that trees, like literally older trees, sort of nurture younger trees and sort of almost bring them up, like the little saplings are brought up the way an elephant would bring up an elephant baby. I mean, it's stuff that kind of blows your mind, and yet it's entirely believable to me.
Yeah.
And the means by which trees communicate with, in the air will communicate with one another, and underground will communicate with one another. It seems sort of unbelievable, and yet it seems substantiated, I believe, through research.
It's amazing, because it really reminds me of one day I looked at my bicycle, and there was a little part underneath the pedals where a little dirt had formed, and there was a blade of grass growing out of it.
How interesting.
And I was like, boy, you give a seed a little dirt and water, and it'll grow anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Well, have you ever heard that song, God Bless the Grass?
I haven't. I'll look it up.
Yes, I believe Dean Stevens has sung that song, but it's a song that dates from kind of the great folk era, I think, of the 60s, and it's a metaphor for the power of the people, if you will,
Yeah.
that the grass will grow up through concrete.
Beautiful. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you've turned into a strength.
Boy, I really do believe that. And it's interesting to go back to the physical body. I mean, I have had various bodily injuries at various times, like bad knee or bad shoulder. And then I engage in this arduous physical therapy that goes on and on and on. And then I end up stronger than I was before the injury.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a sort of pedantic or pedestrian, rather. It's a sort of pedestrian example, but it's definitely one that I've experienced.
No, that was a good example. And tell me one major element of your creativeness, either journalism or music or organizing, that's stayed the same in the years you've done it, and one major element that's changed.
So I would say the thing that stayed the same is that I consider having a voice to be an expression of living an enriched life. And I don't know if that's very well stated, but a flip side of it is I remember once long ago I wrote an article about a group called Freehand. It was about writing. And the woman I interviewed said something like, the definition of poverty is not having a voice. And I thought, boy, that really resonates. And I feel that for myself, if I don't feel that I have a voice as a singer, as a writer, that I won't be happy, that's something I need to feel that I can have on some level. So that stayed the same. The thing that's, I would say, changed is that when you're a writer, it's fairly solitary. You do interview people, but fundamentally it's sort of, I'm driving a train, I'm going to go out and do all these interviews, and then I'm going to sit down and take all my notes, and then I'm going to sit down and write and edit, and you're part of a team, but it's a kind of a solitary type of thing, and it's very me driven. It is very ego driven too, because there's a lot of ego bound up, especially these days, in how many Twitter follows do you had, and how many hits did you get, and did you get on TV? And journalism has gotten more and more, not to be mean, but a little bit kind of superficial. Or sensational and superficial, but driven by what might not be considered right values. There's a lot of like the journalist as superstar, as opposed to the story as a means of changing society for the better.
Yeah.
So in my work as a nonprofit organizer, everything that I do is bound up with other people. It's collective action. Not only does the entire team of the Civic Circle need to be swimming in the same direction, but I've connected with all these other groups too that are engaged in collective action. Groups that are advancing civic learning, groups that are trying to advance a stronger democracy and conflict resolution and unity in the United States. There's this whole movement, big movements that I feel like I'm a small part of. And that's exciting and it's cool and it's definitely different. And I enjoy that aspect of building an organization very much.
I love that. The commonality, the collective camaraderie, connection, all those C words mean a lot to me. Eliza, we just have a few more minutes here. I really appreciate it. Can we go a little longer, or you gotta?
No, that's fine.
Okay. How do you find peace of mind?
Breathing.
Oh, wow. That is a great answer.
It all comes back to the breath.
Conscious breathing. Can you forget to die?
What do you mean?
It is a funny question that I got from it's an old traditional song.
Oh,
It's just, I could send you the roots of it, but it is, like, can a human forget to die?
um, I suppose if you're really in the moment, you're in the eternal now,
Yeah.
and therefore you're not going to be time bound. So you recall that Thich Nhat Hanh passed away fairly recently,
Yes.
and Nick posted on Facebook. For those listening, Nick is my brother, Nick Newland. I thought I had printed it out and put it in this special book of poems of mine, but I can't find it. But anyway, he posted a short reflection by Thich Nhat Hanh, which was about, I can't really capture it, but it was about the meaninglessness of death, of how,
Yeah.
I live beyond death, haven't died. None of us is born and died. We're all together forever. I mean, I'm simplifying, but it
Yeah.
was very beautiful. And I wish I had it right here so I could read it to you.
But it's similar to this quote I use when I talk about my mother's about we live in the eternity, or
Mhm.
actually the two, James Joyce and Frank Zappa say all times are happening now.
Yeah.
Do we really invent this? Why do we invent the calendar? Why do we invent time? So we know what time this Zoom starts and what time it ends,
Right.
and
Right.
and all these things about how time governs us, but is it all just, flowing, much like Eastern philosophy is? It's just this river flowing, and
Yeah.
somehow we have to process it.
Yeah.
So if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Wow. I would say it gets better.
That's Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Under.
Under, and why?
I've just read that. I think if you read, I don't know, like things like Emily Post or Miss
Yeah,
Manners or,
yeah,
Hints for Heloise, this is a consensus that has existed by columnists who address domestic correctness, whether
very
they're
good,
whether they themselves are correct or not is another matter.
very good. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh, wow. Um, Swan Dive.
Oh, I like that. And they want to scent the glue and the binding. What smell?
Patchouli?
Oh my God. That's the root. That's the root of my question, because when Madonna released her book, she had the glue scented patchouli. So that's how I got that question.
I don't know why I love patchouli so much, but I just do.
They also want to have a color other than black for the ink on some of the pages. What color?
I think blue is suitable.
Blue's good. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Oh, goodness, Jerry, that is so difficult to answer. Oh my goodness. Okay, so to express humility, I would want it to be made of paper
Okay.
so that it would disintegrate and not stick around as an egotistic testament to me and my
Right.
ego. And I would want it to be placed somewhere really humble, like in Jackie Park steps from my house,
Oh, fine. That's fine. Yeah. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
A private jet?
Private jet is a valid answer. Thank you so much. You know what I get the most? Fame, money, and heroin.
Oh, goodness. That's a rough one these days.
That tells you a lot about what people. So there's a couple, because you're so well studied in the political world. There was a movie in 2010 called Problema, and they asked people a few questions, and they were modern thinkers, and it was really a beautiful film. I think it's free on YouTube. But one of them that I like is, how do we stop our governments from going to war? And it just seems so appropriate for them to ask that so many years ago. And it's a basic question. How
Yeah.
would you tackle that?
Yeah. You know, it's funny because in a sense in the US, we've kind of accomplished that because the public sentiment is so against war, that it's really not even a political option for President Biden. He has said over and over again, and I believe him, we're not going to go to war with Ukraine. I mean, with Russia over Ukraine. We're not going to go to war in Ukraine. And he pulled out of Afghanistan at great political cost.
Yeah.
But he was responding to public sentiment. Voters in America have made it quite clear they do not want to get engaged in war. And so in a democracy, the way to prevent rulers from going to war is by punishing those that do and making it quite clear that if you do go to war, we're going to vote you out of office. Now, if you live in a place like Russia, how do you prevent Russia from going to war? Well, boy, that's a tough one. And I think it's been very difficult for the Russian people. They're not happy, but Putin has cracked down so vigorously on free expression. Do you know that you can go to jail now for even saying that their presence in Ukraine amounts to war? You can be jailed in Russia for saying that.
Wow.
So what do you do in a situation like that? I don't know the answer.
Yeah. That was good. I love this one they asked too. What does courage mean now?
Telling the truth.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because Louis Buñuel said, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. Any thoughts on his reflection?
I think he's sort of saying he's not in favor of people being didactic. The way we often associate organized with religion with saying, this is the one way,
Yeah.
and many religions actually have that exact phrase, religious writings, Christian writings, is the one way, the truth and the life. I think that that's actually turned a lot of people away from organized religion. I think that a more accurate statement would be that there are many ways, and so that I think is what he's speaking about. But I think in the context of kind of social justice and, abuse by leaders and civil rights violations, that it is okay and important to tell the truth.
Yeah. I agree. Just a couple more. I really appreciate your time. This has really been fun. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you, Eliza?
It still is about connecting with other people.
Yeah.
That's where I think I'm going to find meaning.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I got two more questions. And the first question I asked was, what's the best thing for a human being? And it was based from someone who studied with Wilhelm Reich, and they said other people, So that was beautiful. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I cannot say that I see it developing in the way that I would like to, but I personally think it's going to happen, which is I think we are going to really shake off this sort of backlash that we see going on to civil rights and equity across race. And I think, already, frankly, I see a backlash to the backlash. And when I look at my daughter's generation, she's 22, I do not possibly imagine in my life that her generation is going to be running around banging books and firing assistant principals for reading books that others deem inappropriate for second graders. I just think that's going to be long in the rearview mirror. I think the younger generation, I see hope in the younger generation. I mean, I don't know what you observe in younger people, but I feel like they're so much more with it and tolerant and, enlightened than we are, that when I see kids, that's what gives me hope and excitement.
Yeah, because the last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
I'm just innately an optimistic person, honestly. And because I'm about advancing civic power and democracy, I really have faith in democracy. I really do believe that if we take all 7 steps to democracy, that we can have a lot more civic power than we realize. And it's a strange thing to say I have faith in democracy today, because democracy is under threat internationally and at home. And yet I still believe in democracy and have faith in it.
That is so cool, because that's what I framed the whole interview with. The last question, what gives you the most optimism? Because that was the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So it's like best thing for a human being. But you said that so fast earlier, and I was trying to write it down. I think it's worthy of repeating. These 7 steps, and what's the origin of them? Did you make them up, or did you get them? You consolidated them?
I did make them up. And the origin is that when I first decided to start this group, I thought, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write a book about, how average people can revive democracy. And I trundled off to my public library every day for several, weeks to sort of the draft and outline of this book. And I boiled it down to there's going to be 7 simple steps that any average citizen can take to revive democracy. And these are the 7 steps: listen, learn, choose, join, speak, act, and lead. And then I got kind of annoyed with being in the library by myself every day, all day. And I was like, I need to get started on this nonprofit. My initial plan was write the book and then start the nonprofit. And I thought, no, that's crazy. I need to get going on the nonprofit. I'll come back to the book. But the work I did on the book was so valuable for the nonprofit, because those 7 steps of democracy became the backbone of this curriculum, both the show and the curriculum that I now share with youth. And it's all about civic skills.
That is so beautiful. Now you got to go a little slower. Listen's 1.
Listen is civility and peaceful conflict resolution. And just to take it one more step, Jerry, the power of peace has value not only in terms of civility and human interaction on a person-to-person level, but it is the most powerful tool for social change. So listen has so many ways that it resonates.
Beauty is you can expound on them, but you can reduce them to 1 word.
Exactly.
The second word is learn.
Learn is news literacy. And for the little kids, we try to introduce an element of digital literacy too, in the sense of being responsible for what you post and share, not only because you might spread an untruth, but you might hurt someone else's feelings. And we don't want to do that in a civil society. Choose is voting. And what we teach kids is all of the who, what, when, where, and why of voting. How you register, who do you choose who to vote for, why do we vote, why voting matters. Join is service learning or volunteering, and we explore the power of community, the common good, and we do students select and do a volunteer activity. Speak is advocacy and speaking out, and we introduce students to the First Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights, what their rights are, how you can express yourself. Act is organizing, and we explore with students, if you were to make a protest sign, what would it look like? This kind of thing. And then lead is running for office, but it really could be any kind of public service or leadership in a broader sense.
Boy, those are 7 great steps, and what a way to conclude. Eliza, I hope our dialogue can continue on and on forever and ever. It's really been fun. I thank you so much.
Jerry, thank you. It was so delightful to talk to you for this hour and plus. It was really wonderful. Appreciated all your creative and interesting questions.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.